Hello, Hope Fellowship. I'm glad to join you today for the next in our Passion Week series. For this on Tuesday of Passion Week, and it's my opportunity to look at the passage continuing in John chapter 18, as we continue in this looking at what's happening in this narrative of happening with Jesus as he was arrested, and now he has been taken to the place of the high priest. So if you would read with me in John 18, starting at verse 19. John writes, "The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, 'I have spoken openly in the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said.' And when he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, 'Is that how you answer the high priest?' Jesus answered him, 'If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?' Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest." And continuing on, verse 25, "Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, 'You also are not one of his disciples, are you?' He denied it and said, 'I am not.' One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, 'Did I not see you in the garden with him?' Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed." So what's going on here in this passage? Why is this important for us to understand? Well, first of all, this passage that talks about Jesus being questioned really sits in the middle of two different small kind of sub-stories. You read the verses that precede this, you see that Peter and John are gathered around this charcoal fire at night. First of all, there's an indication that that was probably an illegal trial. And there's a lot of people that are questioning that. Scholars talk about that. But regardless of that, we see Peter is asked at that point, "Are you one of his disciples?" And he says no. And then bookend that with what happens at the latter part of this story that we just read, where a relative of the man whose ear was cut off in the garden earlier that night says, "Hey, you're one of his disciples." And Peter says, "No, I'm not." So we have Peter, who is denying that he is one of Jesus's disciples. And then the prophecy that Jesus made earlier was, "You are going to deny me before the rooster crows," and John records that fact. So again, we have this story of Jesus being before the high priest, being questioned, and it's bookended by Peter denying him. So one of his key disciples, his core guys, that says, "I'm not part of this, and I don't know who he is." Then we have right in the middle this central story of Jesus being questioned. And one of the things, if you see in verse 19, John writes, the high priest, who was actually Annas, probably the high priest, it was the high priest's father-in-law, or the high priest emeritus, if you will, he questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Now, Jesus doesn't respond about his disciples. He responds about his teaching, and he declares the truth. He says, "I'm not teaching anything that you haven't heard before." And it elicits a response of a rebuke by one of the officers. Now, you may recall the story of what happens in the book of Acts where the apostle Paul stands before the high priest at that time and is questioned, and he actually calls him a whitewashed wall. And one of the people rebukes him and says, "Hey, is that how you should talk to the high priest?" And Paul backs off and says, "Oh, I didn't realize he was the high priest. You shouldn't speak ill of the leader." Jesus doesn't do that because he is communicating the truth. And I think what we have here is Jesus, who is God himself. He understands what the truth is, and he is standing for justice. It's ironic that Jesus is standing before a religious leadership that is probably questioning him illegally according to the Jewish law. And Jesus is saying, this is the truth. And he is attesting to the truth in the midst of the pressure. The other interesting thing is Jesus is very aware of the Old Testament law that said that it was the witnesses that had a significant impact on the outcome rather than the person themselves. They are questioning Jesus himself without any witnesses. And again, Jesus appeals to the way that God had set it up, which was, why don't you question the witnesses and they'll tell you what I communicated? Um, that's good and fine, but one of the things that's easy to overlook is what was said in verse 19, that the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples. And in no place did Jesus say, "Here are my disciples," and go talk to them. He was protecting them. Now, his protection of them, his mercy and care for them, it's all the more stark when you see that it's presented right in the middle of two different stories in which Peter denies him. One of those key disciples, one of his closest people, denies him, and Jesus still cares for his disciples. This is amazing. In view the fact that Jesus knows that he is going to the cross and going to be killed, he still protects those who are under his care. So as we look at this story, what implications does this have for us today as the church? Well, first of all, Jesus, we know he is God, and he also is the God-man, the one who models for us what it looks like to live like true humanity, the way God designed us to live, the way Adam was supposed to be. And Paul talks about this in Romans, that Jesus is the new Adam. And even in the manner in which he participated and went through adversity, he models for us what we should look like, what we should live like. Jesus is an ideal leader and an ideal shepherd. He continues to care for those who are under his charge, even when they have abandoned him. So for us, a great question for us is, who is under our charge? If you're a parent, how are you caring for your kids, even when they don't want you around? If you are a friend and your other friends have abandoned you, how do you still care for them? This is what it looks like to live the gospel. Jesus has given us his example, that in the very week in which he was going to the cross, he still cared for everyone that was under his care. And now that we live on this side of the cross, and we live on this side of the resurrection, as we anticipate celebrating the resurrection on Easter, as we anticipate what is going to happen on Good Friday, as we continue on in John's writing, we see that God has incredible care for each of us. He continues to demonstrate his mercy for us, even when we don't deserve it. And he is calling us to do the same, that we would mirror the same kind of character that Jesus has as we care for one another. So I pray that we will be that kind of a community, that we share that kind of care for one another, that we stand for the truth in the midst of adversity, and that we show this gospel love to one another and to those who are around us who don't yet believe in the gospel, that they too can have this kind of a relationship with God and with us. I pray that this is encouraging to you today, and we look forward to gathering together in person soon. God bless.